So, Marina, I'm really glad that you took the time today. I'm excited to talk about what you guys are doing. As a natural place to start, looking at your career, I want to talk about business intelligence. So, maybe a simple question: what is business intelligence? What does it mean?
Well, there's different definitions. There are some definitions out there that is more related to the tools, to building the infrastructure, to be able to extract insights from data. But the masters I did here in Montreal at HEC Montreal, it was more about extracting knowledge from data to make a better decision. And it was a lot around business decisions. So if we can summarize, it's data analysis and data science for better business decision making.
Yeah, it's interesting. How did you get interested in it? Because I find like I used to be a geek in Excel, like a small like admission. I used to live in Excel all the time. Like at a certain point, I was like ninja level 5. Like now I'm not anymore. So I get the how should I say that cool part. So I'm curious, how'd you get into it? How'd you get interested?
Well, actually, I did before that master's bachelor in communication. So very different approaches, but I was feeling that it's the same type of process, extracting knowledge from information. Communication, it's more on the qualitative side, and data science, business intelligence on the quantitative side. So for me, it was a continuation. But if I take a step back, why I chose those two academic paths is because I had really a hard time deciding what to choose because I had too many interests with many different disciplines, and I was feeling a bit frustrated to choose from so early on a specialization. I was interested in biology, in art, in math, in social sciences, so many different things. So my strategy was to go with disciplines that I could use in many different markets and many different situations. So communications and data science, business intelligence was fitting those criteria because information and knowledge, it's useful in anything you do in life. So that was really the strategy there. And it's really true when I was doing my bachelor that I was also on the side doing different projects, working as a freelancer in many different things. And one of those things was working with an early stage company in digital marketing. So it was an extension of communication, but it's there that I learned that the content I was producing and creating and distributing, that I could also analyze its performance. So it's really how I learn about analyzing data first. And then when I dig deeper into that field, I went to conferences, to meetups, then I learn about data science, AI, the potential of those technologies in many different sectors. So I went from learning a bit about that on my free time in the internet to doing a master's in that field because I was seeing really the potential of that for the long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the masters was a way to like, kind of learn and accelerate basically that knowledge that you saw, like like that you learned online. Maybe like another question, but is that you seem to always to want to do more like projects, entrepreneurial projects in companies. Like, was that something that you always thought, like, hey, I want to like start companies, from an early age, or was it more, let's say, like during school that you're like, hey, maybe like doing different projects and starting companies is a thing I want to like experiment with.
It was never really a clear plan. It was always something I considered as an option. But what really I was interested in since pretty young age was more understanding um, complex problem, but from many different aspects, and trying to bring um, solutions that don't really exist yet, or just learning about those solutions, and trying to be in some context where I was always learning something new and stretching a bit myself in that type of knowledge. So I was looking for those type of experience, those type of places. But I guess entrepreneurship fits those natural tendencies. But it wasn't. I wasn't looking actively to start a company. It was just that by looking for those type of experience, it was the best match in terms of career path, I guess.
Yeah, I think you said it well, right? If you want to like stretch and learn, start a company. There's no better way to like be confronted with like you have to learn really quickly. So yeah,
Exactly.
I admire you for that, for for the different projects and companies you started. Maybe we could talk about your current company, which is kind of why I reached out, why I love what you guys are doing. So yeah, talk to us about Eli Health, what it is, how you came up with the idea.
Yeah, well, initially it came from a discussion I had with my life partner, who's also my co founder. That's really how it started. We were talking about contraception. I was looking for a better contraception method, or one that fitted what I wanted. So, to avoid hormones, invasive devices, but still keep the effectiveness. And I was talking to a lot of women around me to see what approaches they had to contraception, what methods they were using. And then we realized that there was a widespread dissatisfaction towards the current methods. We saw that there was a lack of innovation since the 60s. And so then we saw that, well, that's a big problem. And could we find a solution? So by talking to those hundreds of women, to physicians, to exist and looked at the existing research, we saw that hormone monitoring could be a viable path to reach um, a better or a contraception method that fits those criteria of hormone-free, non-invasive, but still effective. So that's really how it started initially. But really quickly, we saw that once we're able to measure hormone levels, that it goes much beyond contraception. It can also be used the opposite way, of course, for people trying to conceive. And now there's 1 in 6 couple having difficulties to conceive in Canada. That number has doubled over the past couple of years. So it's a really growing need. But it goes also beyond contraception and fertility, because hormones are at the root of many conditions and transitions that women experience across their life. If we think about puberty, around about menopause, it's all driven by hormonal fluctuations. Same thing for the menstruation and the ovulation every month, and many symptoms also that we feel across the months. There are up to 90% of women feeling symptoms related to PMS. So really having that data in her hands can enable us to take control of our health at all of these different stages of our life. So that really became our mission, to put this data in women's health, so that they can have better control of their health at every stages of their life, not just around fertility or contraception.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the that trend of 1 of 6, and I think there was a stat just this week that was released. I think it was U.S. data showing that birth rates in the U.S. Are the lowest since like the 70s.
Mhm.
So it's like it seems like there's for whatever reason, like obviously people, one of the one of it's just like cultural, like people having kids later in life, which obviously decreases,
Mm.
the ability, and then also environmental and other issues. Like part of the reason, like to full transparency, I reached out was like I've we've experienced these issues, my wife and I. So it's like it's not been easy, and I feel like what you guys are offering, obviously in those lines, is a great offering, right? To be able, like you said, for women to take more control of their bodies, of their health. So in those, like you mentioned, those three buckets, right? So it's like contraception, conceiving, and then their menstrual cycle and get more control. Right now, you're providing data, so without going too much into the details, but like maybe give us a bit of how your product would work, like at a high level.
Yeah, so it's a device that we use at home. So there's a cartridge, a reading device, and the mobile application. You take the cartridge, put it on your tongue a few seconds, put the cartridge in the device, and then you receive the results a few minutes later on your cell phone. So to give an idea of a product that we can make some parallel with, it's the glucometer that has been around since many years already. So a device, some cartridge, and the most modern alternative also have an application combined to it. So instead of measuring glucose in blood, we measure hormones in saliva.
Interesting, yeah. How different is it than, let's say, 23andMe, right? Where it's kind of the same thing. You take your saliva, but you ship it back in the mail, and like, but it's like your full genetic makeup, and it's like it's an expensive test, but it gives you like a lot of very interesting data, like about diseases, but it's maybe not as timely as like a woman's cycle, let's say, right? Because it's going to take weeks to get the analysis. So curious to hear you on.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main difference. The ability to do those measurements at home. It's not only the convenience, but it's that it enables a high frequency testing and long-term testing as well. So those products that exist today, mainly in the US, where we can order a test online, then we receive the test a few days or a few weeks later, take the test, send it back. Then it takes a few days or a few weeks, and then receive the results afterwards. So the whole process takes at least a few days and most of the time a few weeks. So when you're trying to understand what's happening really on the day to day with your health and try to see how hormonal data impacts your health, you need to have really that granular level of data. If we think, for example, of a smartwatch, it's the difference between having our pulse rate every day or every time we want to have it, and really try to correlate it with how we feel at the moment, versus if we would go to the doctor once per year to take our pulse rate. That's a very different granularity of data, and that granularity makes all the difference with what type of insights can we get out of it.
Yeah, very interesting. It's super interesting, and I know you guys are pre-launch, and you recently, raised a round in December, so not too long ago. So, what's your ambition? Like, what do you see as the opportunity? How big is, like, obviously, how big is the market, the TAM, where it's like every woman in the world? I think that was pretty easy to answer, but like, yeah, curious to hear you as how you see the next steps. How do you see yourselves growing and scaling?
Yeah, well, in terms of addressable market, how we see it, eventually, of course, we would love that it's every woman in the world. And since we're really looking to be there at every stages of a woman's life, it's of course a huge total addressable market. We focused first on really understanding the fertility and contraception market. For the fertility aspect, where we fit it where we fit in the fertility journey, that represents a 12 billion total addressable market just in Canada, US, and Europe. And for contraception, for the same regions, it's a 92 billion total addressable market for women looking for hormone-free contraception. So not even the entire market of women looking for contraception, because that's virtually 99% of women that have used a contraception method over their life. So that's a pretty big market.
Just gonna say, yeah, pretty big work. And in terms of next steps, are there any particular markets you go after? Like at first, like is it gonna be more from North America or Canada or?
Yeah, we're focusing on North America first, so US and Canada, and we have an initial focus on fertility, so helping couples conceive. And the reason why is that it's a low risk use case. Couples trying to conceive, they are not pregnant, and if there's anything, the worst that can happen is that they're still not pregnant, so status quo. And for contraception, of course, the consequences can be very different, so that's why we will go after those higher risk use cases later in the life of the company, because we want to make sure to have, of course, all the regulatory aspects and the clinical aspects in place to go after those use cases very responsibly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mentioned like the regulatory hurdles are gonna be like pretty important, right? Like in terms of like just cost and like figuring it out and like working with governments. Like, and it's one of those like you probably can't like circumvent and launch before being approved, right? So you have to have buttoned up. It's not like the Uber use case of like launch everywhere and see what happens. Like this case, it's I think people want to have that like that seal of approval, from a regulatory body. Um,
Exactly.
on that front, not on the regulation front, but then just on the product front a little bit. So you said you're capturing the data, and I imagine over time you'll be able to not just like give a current status, but also be more proactive in terms of recommendations. So curious to hear you, like in terms of like the future of potential opportunities in the future, and how you see the product evolving.
Yeah, so how we see the product evolve, it's really to build a platform where we have multiple hormones or even other analytes that we're looking at, and that's one of the differentiator of our technology, that we can go after those different hormones and analytes in the same product, and this will enable us to go after that vision that we have to be really there at every step of a woman's life. But another thing that we find very exciting is on the research side, because there has been a lot of gap. It's historically in terms of women health research and funding. It's markets that have been overlooked for a long time, and the same applies to in research. And so having really this data of longitudinal hormone fluctuation, it's something that doesn't exist today. So being able to have that data and collaborating with a researcher will also enable us to make our understanding of women's health progress. So for example, when I was talking about the symptoms that women feel on a day-to-day towards their across their cycle, it's something that researcher and the medical community doesn't fully understand yet. But the hypothesis that's been around is that it's related to hormone fluctuation, not hormone levels, but really the hormonal fluctuations that women feel. But we don't have the data to really test that up until now. But with that new data set, one thing we want to do is do those collaboration to make our understanding of women's health progress, and that will directly translate in a better well-being and health for women ultimately.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's kind of like, it goes back to like the idea of 23andMe, where it's like if you have like 100 million people's genetic profile, that's data that we've never been able to centralize and analyze. And I find the same thing when it comes to the data you're collecting. You'll be able to like really understand at a much deeper level how hormones, how like a female body works. Something that today is very, like you said, it's we're just scratching the surface, right? Like when it is this combination of biology and technology, and it's so many different
Exactly.
fascinating areas, right? If you look like the stomach, for instance, right? Like so many, like we don't know what we're eating and what the impact it's having. It's like we're just starting to figure out, like the gut and all the trillions of molecules in there and how that works. And it's fascinating that you guys are tackling this, which seems to be very open space, right? Like it has massive opportunities. And I imagine from a business slash monetization perspective, right? You have obviously the direct to consumer play, but then you can have another facet of like B2B, like selling research or creating research and like being able to like fund medical research at a much more impactful level, right? Which can have downstream effects also, right? So I don't know, just throwing ideas on the wall, but it's like,
Exactly. Exactly. There's many opportunities on the B2B side as well. For example, with fertility clinics, with researchers, but also with clinical trial organizations. Because historically and still today, one of the reasons why women are underrepresented in clinical trials, it's because it's hard to control for the moment of the cycle, and one of the ways to control for that is to have a very precise prediction and to be able also to know the hormones at every step of the cycle. So with the better ability to understand and to pinpoint the moment of the cycle and the level of hormones, then we remove the main reason why women are not as included as they should. So of course, clinical trials, it's a big market, but that also translates to huge impact for women in terms of health outcomes, because when there's medications, for example, that are tested mainly on men, then it doesn't necessarily apply the same way for women. So there's many examples where for the same medication, because women have been underrepresented in those studies, that they had worse health outcomes than men. So that's a very exciting thing to think that we could have an impact on that front as well.
yeah, that's a fascinating point. Like, I had no idea, right? Like, I don't think as a guy, like I don't think of like, oh, like the day of the month that have an impact on my medication, and like that all the upstream research basically has been flawed to a certain extent because of that, right? So yeah, that's a fascinating insight. I think I never even thought of. Um, so maybe another question, like more broad, like what do you think are the areas we don't know, right? So it's like in the sense of like there's so much we don't know yet. What do you think are the areas that we might uncover new stuff that we like about women's health specifically that we hadn't yet thought about or even or imagined previously?
That's a good question, because in women's health, now it's changing. Now there's a lot of enthusiasm around the market, around that field. There's investments that are going into the market more than ever before. So things are changing. But even the things that we know have not been changed since a long time. So, for example, um, about contraception, it's the same method basically that have been around since 60 years, even if more than half of women are reporting side effects. So, this is something clear, well documented, but that still hasn't really changed, and that's starting to change now. So, we're not even in the community so focused about what we don't know yet, that we don't know, because there are so many basic things that we need to change even before getting there. But there's definitely a lot of things I think that we'll learn once we are able to collect this data around hormones, around other biomarkers that will really impact how we can manage our health on the day to day and understand our body. So you were mentioning the microbiome a bit earlier. I think there's a parallel. That's a great parallel because we feel that there's an impact there, and we're starting to see some first evidence of that. But we need to do much more research to really uncover those new aspects.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, fascinating story, Marina. It feels like you guys are just getting started, so I'm gonna have to invite you for like a round two and like not too long, probably to like see where you guys are at post launch and talk about traction and growth. Maybe final question would be is if people want to find out more, where can they reach out and learn about your company?
Well, a great way to do it is to go on our website, so Eli.health, or to reach out on LinkedIn as well. We're very active on that front too, and we'll have openings very soon, job openings in the tech and business aspects. So if people are listening and know people in the biosensor research, different biotech expertise, and of course the business part with a strong interest in women's health. Well, we'll be glad to get in touch.
Amazing, amazing. And maybe a final question. I forgot to ask. Where does the name come from? How did you come up with a name for your company?
Well, actually, it was a process that went pretty fast. We always saw the technology as a companion in women's lives, so we thought that having a name, a close to human name, would be a good thing. We wanted a short name, and we wanted also a unisex name, because there's a lot of people who don't really identify as being a woman, but that still have the biology of that gender. So we wanted to make sure that we're inclusive with every people that wants to use the product. So that was really the process: a name, short name, not related to a specific gender.
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes the best names are the simplest, right? I love the name. It's like it's just simple and it's like it stands out. So yeah, great. Well, continued success, Marina. I really enjoyed our conversation and thanks for being on.
Well, thanks for having me.